Rambam. We begin a new section in the book of Zroim, which literally means seeds, but it's about agriculture. And we're now doing the laws of Truma. Truma means to set aside, to uplift. It's a gift that's given to the Kohanim, to the priests. We'll see, it's from the agriculture, 2%, 1/50th of your produce to give to a Kohanim. That's the basic idea over here, but let's look inside. Contain 8 mitzvahs, 2 positive and 6 negative. The commandments are to separate. When we say commandments, it means the biblical law. And Rambam, of course, is going to go into the details to give us the parameter of those mitzvahs, of those details in the mitzvah. Right? To separate Truma Gedayla, to separate Trumas Meiser, and we'll explain all of them. Not to separate Trumas and tithes in an improper order, but instead to separate them in the prescribed order. And one other than a kohen, a priest, should not partake in Truma. In others, only a kohen can partake, priest. Number 5, that even a servant of a kohen or the worker should not partake of Truma. Other things they can partake, but not in this. That the uncircumcised person ought to partake in Truma, meaning a kohen that's uncircumcised, right? Because it's only the kohen can have it. Number 7, that an impure priest should not partake of Truma. And that a halal, we'll explain what that is, that someone's got a deficiency in their being a kohen, being a priest, should not partake of Truma or the portions of the sacrifice given to Kohanim. These mitzvahs explained in the ensuing chapters. Okay, so according to scriptural law, the obligation to separate Truma and tithes, right? Tithes is the 10% that is given to the Levites. That will not really be discussed here. That will be a separate. But they're equal in this idea. Applies only in Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel. It applies whether the temple is standing or not. Right. So now, for example, it applies. So that's why getting produce from Israel is a big problem to get it here, because there's a question: did Truma and Meiser, was it taken from it? Right. In Israel, they're more strict about it, but what they export, not necessarily. So happened. My wife unknowingly bought oranges from Israel. It's a problem because you have to take Truma Meiser from it, because they don't do that. And even in Israel, you have to be careful. It's harder to keep kosher in Israel than it is here because of Truma Meiser that applies in the land of Israel today. Right, as Rambam just said, whether it's standing or not standing, the holy temple, some laws only apply when the temple is standing. Obviously, sacrifices, right? Only when you have a temple. In any case, this law applies, and just that you should, be aware and be careful that when you do buy Israeli product, it has to have a proper hechsher, right? So oranges don't have a hechsher because they don't need a hechsher. They don't need a stamp of approval because it's an orange. If you're buying orange jam, right, made from orange peel, so if it has a proper kosher hechsher that is under proper supervision, then you'll know that tithes were taken from it and Truma was taken from it, right? Important. But the raw fruit is a problem because that doesn't need, right? And that stuff is sold in outside of Israel without taking Truma Meiser. So for that, that we had to take Truma Meiser from it. in order to be able to use it and need it, right? Which we'll learn here. Okay. The prophets ordained that these obligations should be observed in Babylon as well. Babylon is of Iran, Iraq, because it is adjacent to Eretz Israel, and the majority of Jewish people journey to and from there. Right after the destruction of the first Holy Temple, right in the 6th century before the Common Era, the Jews were exiled into Babylon, and even when they came to the Second Holy Temple, the majority of Jews still remained in Babylon. So it became like an extension of the land of Israel. Biblically, no. Obviously not biblically, rabbinically. Okay, it's important to appreciate that. That's why the prophets can only add something rabbinically. They can't add something biblically, because biblically can only be in the Torah and the 5 books of Moses, be there, or that was passed down from Mount Sinai as a biblical law. Okay. The sages of the early generation ordained that it also be observed in the lands of Egypt, the lands of Ammon and Moab. Oh, we just had in Chumash today. Here's Ammon and here's Moab, right? We had a Chumash today. Because they are the peripheries of Eretz Yisrael. Okay, halacha number 2. Whenever Eretz Yisrael is mentioned, the intent is the lands conquered by the king of Israel or by the shofet, the judge, shayf, okay, a prophet with the consent of the majority of the Jewish people. This is called the conquest of the community. Okay. Yeah, we'll learn more about that much later. If, however, if an individual Jew or a family or a tribe go and conquer a place for themselves, even in the land given to Abraham. Abraham was given a much greater land. He was given 10 nations. We only conquered 7 nations. He was given much more than what we have, that we have in the times of the kings of Israel. So even if you go to that place, which is inherently got a Jewish connection, it's not considered Eretz Yisrael in the sense that one is obligated to observe all the mitzvahs there. For this reason, Joshua and the court divided the entire land of Israel into tribal portions, even though it was not conquered entirely at that time. In this way, when every tribe would ascend and conquer its portion, it would not be considered as merely individual conquest. Interesting. Interesting. Hold on 1 second. Just I'm gonna call you. I'm gonna call you back. I'm just learning teaching Rambam right now. Okay. Okay. My daughter in Atlanta, who just gave birth to a baby 1 week ago today. Yeah. Okay. The lands of the King David conquered outside the land of Canaan, Aram Naharaim, Aram Tzeva, Achlab, and the like. Did I?
For this reason, Joshua restored.
I said that, huh? Should the court divide the land into tribal portions, even though they didn't conquer? You know, I read that. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Hold on. So where is this now? Aram Naharaim. I think that's further north. Okay, let's see. I don't have it on my map over on this map. It's on a full map. And I like to even though it was a king of Israel who was acting with the consent of the high court, it is not considered the land of Israel with regard to all matters, nor is it like the diaspora, Babylon and Egypt, with regard to all matters. It said it was removed from the category of the diaspora, but did not enter the category of Israel. Hold on. They're located in contemporary Syria. These places are in Syria. Yeah, I thought it was in the north. Yeah. Okay. So why was its level considered lower than that of Eretz Israel because David conquered them before he conquered all of Israel. Mm,
So that means it's not considered as.
no, sorry. Because it wasn't done in the right order. Instead, there would still be there were still member of the seven tribes there. If, however, he had conquered Israel entirely in all of its boundaries, and after he's conquered other lands, his entire conquest would have been equivalent to Eretz Israel with regard to all matters. Lands of the King David conquered are called Syria. Oh, okay, there. Okay, there are dimensions and laws that apply to Syria that resembles the laws that apply in Eretz Israel. And there are dimensions and laws that resemble those that apply in the diaspora. A person who purchases landed property in Syria is comparable to one who purchases in Eretz Israel with regard to Trumas ties and sabbatical year. All the laws that apply in Syria are of rabbinic origin. Okay, so that's clear. It's rabbinic origin.
This law apply to this day.
Hmm?
This law apply to this day.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I don't know how that, I mean, there are no Jews living in Syria today, by the way. So, no, no. So I don't know. Oh, I mean, actually, maybe there's 20.
You see it, very few people, very few that know this.
Okay. There are dimensions. Sorry, we did that. Number 5. All the lands that the Jews who ascended from Egypt took possession of were sanctified in the first consecration of the land. When they were exiled, the sanctity was nullified. You hear that? Which means the halachic obligations were not, right? Sanctity means, like we say, Asher Kiddushanu b'mitzvah. When we do a mitzvah, we say that you had sanctified us with the mitzvah, right? So the sanctity left Israel, therefore the mitzvah left when they were exiled, right? Meaning, biblically, rabbinically, you still had an obligation, but not biblically. Okay? The rationale is that the initial consecration came about because of conquest. Hence, its consecration was effective for the time it was under their rule, but not for all time. It doesn't mean that the land of Israel is not a holy land, sanctified, and that it's a holy land that belongs to the Jewish people is a separate thing than the sanctity of the land for the sake of a mitzvah, right? A distinction. A distinction. There's a sikh on the Rebbe that's a very, fundamental one, and have to look it up. I have to look it up, but I don't remember the details now. It's not that it's no longer the land of Israel, the holy land of Israel, still the holy land of Israel, but the sanctity leaves it for it now that it's that you're obliged to fulfill any mitzvah there biblically. Why? Because we got it through conquest, so therefore we lost it through conquest. The sanctity came because of conquest. Right? That was its limitation, if you will. Okay? Oh, look at now. But when, by contrast, the descendants of the exiles descended from Babylon and took possession of the portion of the land, they consecrated a second time. This consecration is perpetuated forever for that time and all time, right? Why? Because they didn't conquer it. They were given it. Right? They were given the land. They didn't conquer the land. But there's still a problem. We didn't conquer the land, but not most of the Jews were on the land. And for biblical law to be maintained has to be when the majority of Jewish people are living on the land. So it was not biblical law at that time. The sages left those places that had been settled by the Jews who ascended from Egypt, but were not settled by those who ascended from Babylon in their previous halachic status, and did not exempt them from the obligation of truma and tithes, so that the poor could rely upon them in the sabbatical year. Our holy teacher released Beit Shan from those places which the Jews who ascended from Babylon did not take hold of and exempt them from the obligation of truma and tithes. Also decided that Ashkelon should be exempted from the tithes. So 1 second. The sages left those places. It's settled by the Jews, was sent from Egypt. So when they came up for the second Commonwealth, right, with Ezra, and the 70 years after the destruction of the first Holy Temple in the 5th century, right, before the Common Era, so they didn't settle the entire land that they did previously. Yet, in those other areas, you still had to give truma and tithes to the poor, right? You still had to give. Remember, this is all rabbinic, though. Why is it rabbinic?
Because it was conquered.
No, it was not conquered. Second Beis Hamikdash was given to us. It's because the majority of Jews did not live in Israel at that time. They lived in Babylon. Biblical law applies to the land of Israel only when the majority of Jews live there, right? The fact that they conquered the land initially and they were conquered afterwards, right? What does that mean? It doesn't mean that in between that time that it was not biblical law in the first temple. It was. What it means is that the status of the sanctity of the land has gone because of the conquest, and therefore biblical law does not apply, right? Like the 70 years between, Jews lived in Israel. So Jews who lived there didn't have a biblical obligation to perform mitzvahs of the land. They had rabbinic law that they had to. Rabbinically they did, but not biblically, right?
And today, what would it be today? Is it an obligation to observe the commandments relating to the land?
So that's a good question, because today it's close to the majority of Jews live in Israel.
Because you were mentioning the oranges earlier.
Yeah. So I think that it's still only rabbinic. It's only rabbinic law. It's only rabbinic law. I'm not certain it's only because of majority. I'm not certain about that. Good question.
For
Yes.
yes. Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Just need a signature. Is that okay?
Go ahead. Sorry.
So, first name. So much. When is it?
Thank you. God bless. All right. Okay, number 6. Following guys. They're very, okay, thus the entire earth is divided into 3 categories in relation to those mitzvahs involving the land. Okay, that's what was Eretz Yisrael, Syria, and the diaspora. Eretz Yisrael itself is divided into 2 categories. Those portions settled by the Jews who ascended from Babylonia, and those portions were settled only by the Jews who ascended from Egypt. The diaspora is divided into 2 categories: Egypt, Babylon, Ammon, and Moab, in which the mitzvahs are observed according to the decrees of the sages and the prophets, and other lands in which the obligations of the Trumas and Meisers are not observed. Right? That would be diaspora, right? Diaspora to Egypt, Babylon, Ammon, and Moab, they're observed biblically, not biblically, rabbinically, right? And other lands, that would be C, should put a letter C there, but it didn't. But there's the obligation of Truma and Mises, which are agricultural laws, right, are not observed. Got it? Okay, we're going to stop here. Amazing. All right, beautiful. All right, folks, have a great day and a
Thank you.
wonderful Shabbos.